But the solicitor has already ruled, essentially, through document he sent to me a year ago, and through everything I follow in the story, that the also doesn't apply as both conditions. So if somebody does stand up at the FTM, and just, we in the 3% year, no waiver, no one was even thinking about a waiver, if somebody stands up and does it, under the solicitor's interpretation, he's going to back it up and it's going to fly, okay? So in that regard, I just want to share a thought, and that is that the bottom line here is that it's the logical and of the 4/5 affirmative vote of the levy, okay, the excess levy, and a majority at the FTM. And if there's a lot of taxpayers in this town that look every year at the paper and they say, oh, 3.5%. Worst case, it's 4.5%. Next year, worst case, it's 4.25%. And they stay home. All those taxpayers stay home. And there's a little bit of be careful what you wish for here, because if a situation is created where the taxpayer, there is no tax cap in Tiverton. In my opinion, this draft legislation essentially says there is no, by that number 3, there is no tax cap in Tiverton. That's what this says. And if it goes through like this, and there is no other requirement under the solicitor's ruling of shall also, then the taxpayers are going to be forced to go to the meeting every single year, every single taxpayer, to protect themselves from a 10 or 12% increase. Yep. And so there's a little bit of be careful what you wish for there, because it'll be like the Wild West. And I think a lot of people look to the cap and they respect the cap, and a lot of people stay home because of the cap. And if this body, meaning the council, approves something that essentially nullifies the cap or the 4/5 vote, and whatever this thing turns out to be, if it nullifies that, every single taxpayer is going to be open to 20% potentially every year. And so I just put that out as a concept that I'm concerned about.
Thank you.
Good evening, Rob Coulter. Just a couple, I tried to keep up with some thoughts here. I'll just sort of run through them, and if I can elaborate, please let me know. First of all, I just wanted to point out that I believe there are not just Tiverton, but 16 other towns would be, or could be impacted by however this is resolved. And I wanted to point out, I believe you had said that the town council has no power. My reading of the charter is that the budget committee is required to present the town administrator's budget, and I believe the school committee's budget as well. So it's not as if the town administrator sends over to the budget committee and then, you know, your rights have completely stopped at that point. So you do have the town administrator has the power to put his recommendation in front of that, in front of the financial town. Jumping, it's never very fun to talk about hyper-technical construction, but I just wanted to show a few cards maybe that just ever were litigated, which I certainly hope it isn't. When you look at that also, shall also approve, Mr. Leonard, I think you were focused on that. If you focus on the word approve, I think what you'll see is that the word approve appears in section E, when it talks about the governing body approving, but the word approve does not appear in section D, which is one of a couple sort of technical reasons why I don't think that you can read the word also to relate back to subsection D. I know Mr. Faith disagrees with that, and you can, that's just something to think about. We can talk about that a little more if you want. Back to the issue of why in the world would we ever have a vote coming up and a vote coming back. Personally, I happen to agree, I think with Mr. Lambert and Mr. Urquhart, that to send the vote up, because it's the city or town, I think that has to be done by a majority of the town council, because the town administrator works for the town council. But on the way back down, it has to be by the supermajority of the governing body. And there's a difference between where it says governing body and where it says city or town. And I could foresee a situation maybe this year where right now, where we don't think we're going to get that fourth payment, that it might be really smart to go see if we qualify. Let's just see if we qualify. Who knows if we'll qualify, who knows if we won't. But then in a month, things come down, as you hear me say, who knows, maybe we'll strike oil underneath town hall, circumstances may change. That's where, okay, we qualified, Now let's really decide if this is what we actually want to do. And having the supermajority protection is really what the idea is. Breaking the cap is supposed to be an extraordinary event, and I'm not a charter jock, but I think there are other places in the charter where there are, I think you have to take a 4/5 vote maybe to declare an emergency. There might be some other places, so it's not, extraordinary that you would do that. 2 more points. First of all, we've talked a lot about this. There's some ambiguity here, but I just want to remind everybody that this isn't just us trying to figure out. The state of Rhode Island has already declared consistently what their position is. And I think that the judge would actually defer to that administrative interpretation of this. The documentation that comes down, they always say that you have to take the vote on the levy as well. So that's the law you want, but just be comforted by the fact that you don't have to just make this stuff up. You're really just following what the state has already decided. The letter that the state, if you apply to break the cap this year, the state's going to send you a letter, just like they did in 2008, that said you need to take this 4/5 vote to prove the levy, not to prove notifying them whether you can, if you choose to break the levy. And finally, I just want to point out as well, I know at the end of the day what's really bothering everybody is what is the inherent authority of a financial town meeting. And I did want to point out that the Constitution, state Constitution, Article 13, Section 5, says that nothing contained in this article, this is the Home Rule Charter, that nothing contained in this article shall be deemed to grant to any city or town the power to levy, assess, and collect taxes except as authorized by the General Assembly. So the charter has to be read in conjunction with all of these other, I've run through a bunch of those things, but those are some of the points. I'm happy to elaborate, but thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I've sat here and I've listened to everyone try to force words into what it could be for one possibility or one scenario or another. But when I have to look at what the simplest spirit of the law is, and the simplest spirit of the law is that the governing body of this town is the electors at the financial town meeting. But we can force all kinds of words, also, and approve, whatever. But I think the simplest spirit of that law is what it is. There isn't much more than that.
Our governing body is the financial town meeting.
As it relates to the budget, yes, it is.
And to insert the wording that you propose about, for purposes of this law, the town council is the governing body. And I'm sure this law deals with budgets and taxes. And this town has voted 3 times not to give the town council that kind of authority. So to say that we are the governing authority, insofar as that act applies, would really fly in the face of the desires of the people in this town.
And we've written subsection D out of the act.
Because
the financial town meeting cannot go to Providence and ask for this certification. How would they ever be able to do
No
that?
one's
We can
disputing
act, but
that.
not as the governing
One
board.
at a time. Okay. I think for the purposes of the statute, I think you're right. You can't wait to have a financial town meeting to say, we want to exceed the cap. There has to be a
Yeah,
process.
we all agree with that.
Okay, well then, for the purposes of this act, the governing body then has to be the town council
For going
in
with the-
terms of asking for the permission.
And that's why we're considering this, to try to eliminate that question.
Because, if I remember a few years ago, the huge debate then was, whose budget was it? Was it the town council's budget? Was it the town administrator's budget? Was it the budget committee's budget? That was the big debate just a few years ago, about whose budget it
It
was.
was only resolved a couple of years ago, because up until a couple of years ago, the council didn't even have a say in that
That's
budget.
right.
And I agree with that.
Well, I really, I'm sorry, I was going to address